Uh, Now we're going to move to the next, the last session for this afternoon. It's a plenary, okay? It's called Technology, AI, and Critical Minerals, Inverting the AI Stack, African Agency, Critical Minerals, and the AI Supply Chain. Now, I'm just going to invite the moderator. I think all of these are online, by the way. All right, all of the participants in this next are online. I've got Professor Alondra Nelson, Institute of Advanced Study of the USA. And then from there, she is going to introduce or talk to us about the other, tell us who the other participants are. But before we do that, can I just check the energy here in the house? Do you know that song that says, if you're happy and you know, clap your hands? Do you know that song? Let's do it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know, and you really want to show, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know, stomp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. And I can't hear the feet. All right, thank you so. You can just stand up for a few seconds whilst we're trying to ensure that our colleagues, Professor Alondra Nelson, I see you online. Yeah, please just stand up and just do a bit of, I know you had a great meal today. I don't want you to sleep or doze off. Okay, you can take your seat. Thank you so much. Prof, I'm now hand over through to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction and all of the energy that you have brought into the room as we get started with this conversation. I'm Alondra Nelson. I am a sociologist of science and technology and inequality at the Institute for Advanced Study, which is in Princeton, New Jersey in the United States. I also am a policy advisor here in the United States. We are delighted to be here to share some of the work that we've been doing at the IAS, thinking about the sort of shifting geopolitics related to AI and critical minerals. So this panel, as you know, is Inverting the AI Stack, African Agency, Critical Minerals, and the AI Supply Chain. And the conversation that we want to have together as a group is to introduce to you all some of the conversation we've been having with a global group of experts who work and mineral extraction advocacy, AI infrastructure, AI issues about geopolitics and international affairs, conflict, security, and global politics, including China-Africa relations. And the work today builds upon building efforts that we've been trying to do at the Science, Technology, and Social Values Lab, my lab at the Institute for Advanced Study here in Princeton, that's trying to bring together these very important but often siloed and working alone groups of experts around this critical issue as the sort of hunger, the charge, the sort of work around gaining access to critical minerals and rare earths for this new AI ecosystem that we are developing sort of heats up and speeds up. So I'm going to say just a few remarks just to frame up the panel, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists who will share their remarks, and then we will open things up for discussion. I'm aware we just have about right now 55 minutes, 50 or so, so we will move at a clip. So let me introduce the panelists first. We'll hear first from Dr. Tatiana Karayanis. She's currently serves as Global Affair and Technology Advisor at IAS at the Institute for Advanced Study. Previously, she directed a suite of international programs at the U.S. Social Science Research Council on the United Nations, on global governance, on conflict prevention, and China and the Global South. Earlier, she directed a research and publication program on the intellectual history of the United Nations at the City University of New York's Ralph Bunche Institute for International Affairs. She's had visiting appointments at the City University of New York, the LSE, and New York University. She's a leading scholar specializing in international organizations, global governance, Central Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and at IAS, her current work focuses on the geopolitics of AI governance, supply chains of critical and conflict minerals, and the security implications of emerging technologies. Her most recent book is The Third UN, How Knowledge Brokers Help the UN Think, Oxford University Press, 2021. She holds a PhD in political science from the CUNY Graduate Center and an MA from New York University. We'll then turn to hear from Marie-Therese Peng. She is an affiliate of the Data and Society Research Institute and of the Science, Technology, and Social Values Lab at the Institute for Advanced Study. Her work specializes in global AI governance, the geopolitics of AI supply chains, and critical minerals. Her academic publications include Decolonial Theory as a Socio-Technical Foresight and Artificial Intelligence Research, and Critical Roles of Global Governance Stakeholders and Artificial Intelligence Governance. She was previously at Google DeepMind working on Global South issues on the ethics and society team and the public policy team. She was a technology advisor to the UN Secretary General's Office, leading on the establishment of the Global Digital Cooperation Office, conceptualizing the AI advisory body and the Digital Compact, and helping to develop strategic advocacy with low middle income member states in the AI governance process. With the Green Screen Coalition, she facilitates transnational alliance building at the intersections of technology justice, resource justice, and security with activist communities in Brazil, Costa Rica, Malaysia, Chile, and Taiwan. She is completing her PhD at the Oxford Internet Institute on these same themes. Christian Giroux Nima is a researcher, analyst, and consultant. We'll hear from him after Marie-Therese Peng, specializing in China's engagement with Africa's transition mineral sector, geopolitics, and natural resource governance. With expertise in stakeholder mapping, policy analysis, and economic impact assessment, he has led research on China's copper and cobalt supply chains in the DRC, advised government agencies and think tanks, and participated in high-level strategic discussions on China-Africa mining relations. He is Africa editor at the China Global South Project, non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and former senior associate at CSIS and associate at the European Center for Development Policy Management. He has published extensively on Chinese mining investments, critical minerals, and the great power competition in Africa. So welcome to these excellent speakers. And let me just say a few words just to frame up our conversation here. Forgive me, let me get my notes. So as I mentioned, this panel in part emerges out of a conversation that we've been having it's since June as a group of experts who are interested in thinking about what AI and the AI transition means for work that many of us have been working on for a very long time separately. And I've named some of these: the politics around extraction, infrastructure, conflict, forms of geopolitics, and of course, China-Africa relations. Our core argument here is that there are, I think for the conversation, is that there are hidden material or unacknowledged, underappreciated material foundations of the AI ecosystem. The development of AI that we hear about every day in the news and FT that we're using in our lives depends on a vast and mostly invisible infrastructure of critical minerals extracted from across the globe, but extracted in large part from the global south and as a part of that from Africa. When we map AI's true dependencies, we realize that the copper, the lithium, the cobalt, the gallium, the rare earth elements that connect the data centers to extraction sites do this in ways that most people never consider. A single large-scale data center requires over 1,000 tons of copper. The semiconductor chips powering machine learning need gallium, germanium, and indium. Batteries require lithium and cobalt. Each mineral has a geography, a politics, and communities whose lives are reorganized around those practices of extraction. As I've already intimated, we're witnessing what some analysts have called the next critical mineral supercycle. So this is really a fundamental shift. So even if our work has been in the past dealing with extraction, dealing with conflict minerals, dealing with rare earths, the sort of step change, the fundamental shift of this critical mineral supercycle means that AI has become a primary driver of mineral demand. McKinsey Consulting estimates that AI energy demand from data centers will explode from 17 gigawatts in 2022. It will double by 2030 to 35 gigawatts, rather than the 0.5 annual growth that grid planners had come to forecast and predict. In addition, these data centers that were vast, that were building very quickly, particularly in the United States, will require an additional 1 million metric tons of copper by 2030. So this represents a fundamental shift in the conversation that is quickly also at the same time as AI is coming online, pivoting from electric vehicles to artificial intelligence as a dominant force driving critical mineral demand, critical mineral policy debate. So these same materials powering AI are essential for renewable energy, as we know, and this is creating kind of, a kind of growing space and demand and need for kind of extraction of various types. So AI is ratcheting up the need for things like copper, which I've already mentioned, but we also know that each EV, electric vehicle, needs 4 times more copper than a traditional car. With AI infrastructure needs and demands really sort of being compounding this. So what we're seeing, what this is catalyzing is, I think, a new configuration of what we might have thought about previously as core periphery relations. Countries that are developing AI algorithms, including the US, China, and the EU, occupy the technological core, with nations like the DRC, like Chile and Indonesia, being asked to, I think, play peripheral roles as resource exporters, despite providing, as I said at the very beginning, the indispensable crucial materials that even make AI possible. So we think that the traditional north-south flow of development assistance, which is now under pressure and under erosion, obscures the actual south to north flow of essential materials. Research-rich countries, historically positioned as aid recipients, today hold assets that Silicon Valley cannot do without. And yet this apparent leverage shift often masks, I think, deeper continuities and global power structures as well. Beyond the minerals, AI depends on often invisible human labor. Data workers in Africa and Asia who label images, moderate content, clean data sets, and of course we know there is an artisanal mining practices in many of our communities as well. So this labor, this manual labor, this cognitive labor also is indispensable to machine learning, but also remains largely unacknowledged in discussions about the AI ecosystem that's expanding. So this isn't entirely new. There's obviously historical continuities with previous scrambles for resources, for gold, for oil, for coltan. We've seen similar patterns. But I think we want to stress today that today's, or some of us, I think we have some debate about on our panel. But so there's some continuity, but I will speak just for myself and say that I think today's situation is unique, that the most cutting edge technological development directly depends on traditional extraction forms, but it also includes futuristic technologies that both are creating new forms of dependency and extraction, even if they rely on now centuries old patterns of extraction and dependency. So we think this presents a governance challenge for us. Sort of what do we do at the moment when cooperation for governance around these processes in this ecosystem, when some multilateral organizations are weakening, when development aid paradigms are softening, and when we're living in a world in which there are vacuums for new power forms that are emerging. The issue is ultimately about power, who holds it, how it's exercised, and how it might be redistributed. And then, so I'm going to end with as I turn over to Tatiana, with a few questions and I think an imperative. So the questions I want to sort of open up both for the panel and for the audience is, how can we create genuinely mutual rather than extractive engagements? Is a big question, but does this AI moment, if you believe that this moment is distinctive, also offer not just new opportunities for extraction, but also new opportunities for repositioning global actors in new ways with new leverage? Can AI governance acknowledge the full supply chain rather than just the visible technologies? Can we trace accountability from the algorithm to the mine, to the data center, to the extraction site? And I think that's one of the provocations we want to offer you today. And can this be pursued sustainably? I know that was the part of the conversation that was happening just before we got started in the previous panel. Can this be pursued sustainably given Earth's finite resources? So as Tatiana will discuss, we think it's only really by paying attention to the full AI stack, including all of its material foundations, all of the people and labor resources that make it possible, that we can really have a grasp at what's at stake. And so part of this for us is a research imperative. We need new conceptual frameworks. We need a new political imagination to shape this transformative moment rather than to simply document it or to simply accept that it's going to repeat the patterns of the past. And I think the question for us today isn't whether change is occurring, but what kind of change, and whether we can influence its direction towards more democratic governance, more public accountability, and more shared benefit. So with those remarks, I'm delighted to turn things over to Dr. Tatiana Karayanis for the first presentation.
Thank you, Alondra, for that framing. And just before I start, just for the audience, Professor Nelson was also advisor to the Biden White House, and as of yesterday, it was just announced that she's also now a policy advisor to New York's Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani. So Alondra is on his transition team advising the new mayor on issues of technology. So congratulations, Alondra, on that. It's great news. What I'll do, if we can move to the next slide, is provide you with a little bit more detail on what Alondra mentioned. We're thinking about at the Institute. This is a slide of our AI and geopolitics page that I invite you to visit. And I'll talk a little bit about this workshop report that we recently published that is the result of the conversations that Alondra was just referring to. You can download that from the website as well. So let me start with some of the trends that have shaped our thinking about this intersection of mineral extraction and technology, in particular AI. The first trend is that there have been just a whole host of efforts in the last couple of years, indeed a global shift towards developing AI governance frameworks to address what in effect is a regionally fragmented regulatory landscape. Many of these have been in and around the United Nations, and these efforts have included resolutions, the Global Digital Compact that was adopted last year in the margins of the GA, a whole host of summits, high-level commissions, and so forth. The second trend is a massive expansion of AI infrastructure, and OpenAI's announcement of investing $500 billion in AI infrastructure is only the tip of the iceberg. The third trend is the growing competition for critical minerals, but also water, energy, and land. And so we're seeing now AI as a strategic asset in economic, military, and geopolitical competition. And in fact, as we know, in the report, the U.S.-China rivalry has shifted from global competition over research talent and data workers to now competition over energy infrastructure and critical minerals. And I think Christian Giraud will speak more to that. In addition to the rise, exponential rise in energy demand, according that Alondra spoke to, according to Goldman Sachs, the critical minerals market has doubled to $320 billion over the last 5 years and is expected to double again by 2030. And in fact, we see all of this U.S. Pressure on Ukraine, the DRC-U.S. Security Cooperation for Minerals deal, calls for the acquisition of the U.S. acquisition of Greenland and Canada. All these are point to this sharp rise in the competition for minerals. And so the question this leaves us is that at a moment when big tech is seen as ungovernable, could reframing AI governance to attend to the entire AI supply chain offer us new strategies or even access to just existing regulatory frameworks to steer the development of AI as a global public good? And given that value travels from south to north, as Alondra pointed out, how do we recenter the global south in this new global AI economy? So to flesh out a little bit the overarching argument that Alondra put on the table for us, let me just suggest that we make really three arguments in the work.
Tatiana, do you want to advance the slide? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that. Yeah, if we can go to, thanks. So the first sort of overarching argument is that we need a broader aperture to understand the political economy of AI. And typically, the AI value chain stops with the AI stack, the data, the chips, the cloud infrastructures that go into the development of AI systems and models. And in this slide, you see Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, showing how we think, or at least how the tech industry thinks of the sort of conventional AI stack. And this is a screenshot from his a recent keynote speech at the NVIDIA GTC conference in Washington, D.C. last month. And so, as you can see, it's fairly it's fairly compact. But if we move on to the next slide, we argue that effective AI governance needs to go beyond AI models to include the full political economy of AI, which is largely also derived from the Global South. Can we advance the slide, please? Yeah, thanks. And this is how we see the full, what we call the full AI stack. And we argue that we need to start with the upstream foundational layers of the AI ecosystem, but also include recycling and e-waste in the downstream. And each of these layers, of course, has a through line of labor and as Alondra said, each has a politics and a geography and its own value chain. And so, if we can advance to the next slide, here you'll see what the conventional AI stack looks like, and our expanded idea of what we call the full AI stack. And so, what we're arguing is that if we recognize the full material basis of AI, the Global South then becomes an essential contributor to the AI stack, supplying critical resources, labor, and data, and therefore the Global South is not merely simply a recipient of AI advancement. As Alondra noted, in fact, value travels from south to north, and I think Marie-Thérèse will talk a bit more about this inversion of the AI stack. Our second argument is that big tech really operates within an extractive economic model, benefiting from weak labor and weak environmental regulations across the Global South. And we're seeing countries like the DRC and Chile in South America, the world's second and first largest producers of copper, facing increasing pressure from extractive industries, which are worsening economic dependencies. And our third overarching argument is that the AI ecosystem needs really a more participatory and equitable governance framework that not only targets the different layers of the AI stack, but also accounts for the complete AI value chain. And so while the development world has been, for a number of years now, been moving away from aid-based development to more partnership-driven development, current AI governance models continue to reinforce this outdated donor-driven north-to-south development paradigms. And in fact, the UN's proposal last year for a $10 billion global AI fund just merely reinforces dependency rather than empowering the global south. It's all about knowledge and compute transfers, capacity building, and so on. And as much as these are important, this overlooks the historical contribution of the global south, and in particular Africa's contribution to tech progress. And so the recent U.S. withdrawal from foreign aid under President Trump only highlights the need for alternative, development models. And in fact, the current calls for rethinking development assistance, self-sufficiency, and leveraging resource sovereignty only reinforces this argument that we're making. So as Alondra noted, to help inform more equitable governance frameworks, we really need new interdisciplinary and collaborative research. And this is really necessary for us to better understand and govern the expanding intersection between AI, mineral extraction, and the global south. And so we've been bringing together scholars of minerals, natural resources, extraction, with technologists, scholars of international human rights, together in conversation to be able to have a fuller understanding of the full AI stack. And just to wrap up, our work thus far shows that AI supply chains both replicate and reconfigure traditional patterns of extraction, but they also introduce new forms of infrastructure actors and tensions, and they're also actively reshaping labor dynamics within mineral supply chains. And so for the global south and Africa in particular, these pose particularly complex trade-offs. On the one hand, it's a new source of revenue for natural resource exporters. It poses a potential for expanded electrification, but at the same time, it poses a risk for environmental degradation, for competition over water and land use, and the risks and these opportunities are deeply intertwined. Yet the current speed of transformation leaves little room for meaningful public debate about these trade-offs, and so we're really pleased that we can start at least some of these discussions about these trade-offs with all of you. So I'll leave it there and toss it back to Alondra.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. And the slides are really helpful for, I think, illustrating the kind of larger point that we're trying to make about sources of places for sites for advocacy, for intervention, and where policy and power are happening. With that, we will turn things over to our colleague, Marie-Trace Peng.
Hi, everyone. And yeah, thank you for the introduction, Professor Nelson, and also the landscape they've just painted out, Dr. Karayanis. And so my work is both a research at a geopolitical level, for example, the work that we've been doing together, Professor Nelson and Dr. Karayanis, but it's also on the impacts on communities at the front line of infrastructure expansion and across the AI supply chain. And so earlier we heard Lauren Hermanis helping us understand this recursive nature between geopolitics and the realities on the ground for local communities. And there's this repeated need also in the discussions on the continent to negotiate as a bloc to leverage the value of the natural resources on the continent within the context of the energy transition and the digital economy. But from my work, I also see the possibility at a community level for knowledge exchange, for strategies of pushing back and amplifying campaigns on the social and environmental impact of extraction and infrastructure expansion. So as Professor Nelson was saying, that the AI boom has accelerated what is being termed the critical mineral supercycle, the race to the bottom, accelerating extraction whilst obscuring the human and ecological price behind the green and digital transitions. And of course, today, we've been discussing how Africa is a driver of global growth for these two transitions, the energy transition, the digital economy. But however, as Mr. Brian Kagoro also articulated, due to this colonial matrix of power, there's a maintenance of the constant devaluation of labor, land, and natural resources, ensuring the extraction at the lowest possible price and maintaining the continent as a site of extraction. And this has very violent long-term impacts, of course, on people and ecosystems, for example, in the Congo. And it's been discussed at length that the security and sovereignty of the people of the Congo is essential to the re-evaluation of the global supply chain and what has been normalized as an appropriate cost to the tech and energy transition. There's been a call for action to first secure the ground from which the wealth is generated, and ensure that there is a championing of regional value chains. So I was just in Brazil at COP, and in the final negotiations, there was, the final deal recognized the need for a just transition, that a lot of civil society and community campaigners have been calling for, which means helping those who are most affected. However, the key provisions on the exploitation of critical minerals was blocked by China and Russia. And these issues of critical minerals as part of climate negotiations was pushed at the African Climate Summit earlier this year, and where leaders were calling for Africa to reap from its vast resources through value addition rather than continued extraction. So you saw at the climate COP very visible protests from the Congolese delegates who were there, not delegates, the civil society presence that was there. And I'm wondering if it's possible to share my screen, or is the slides only from your side?
If you can please share your screen. The slides only just came in and I'm having trouble setting them up. Thank you.
Yes, don't worry, thank you. So I believe, can you see this? Yes. Okay, so this is an image of the protests that were happening in the negotiation space in the blue zone at COP. And you see that there are Congolese activists who are expressing that the global North energy transition is soaked in their blood, highlighting that the conflict in the Congo is directly connected to the energy transition, but then also the AI infrastructure boom. And so there's this question of how do you ensure that the value and not just the costs accrues to countries across Africa, and especially mining communities. And so whilst at COP, I was with this coalition called the Bazanja Coalition, who are communities living near the mines, surviving conflict in Eastern Congo, and then also from the Congo Basin. And we were talking about when you consider value, the real question is not only who receives the value, but also who defines the value in the first place. And in most extractive zones, value is reduced to revenue, taxes, and exports, all measured from the vantage point of the state and foreign actors. But communities who live on the land understand value as health and basic needs like land integrity, livelihood, and intergenerational continuity. So this points to this wider kind of tension between national security and development, and then human security that countries need to balance. And as earlier was discussed, is presented as almost this false dichotomy. So to ensure that value truly reaches community, there was a member of this coalition, Mr. Naliko Katondolo. He articulated that we need to recenter the landholders as decision makers and not just consulted, but actually there's a level of community control, that we need to shift from compensation to co-ownership, that we need to build local value chains where processing and refining is happening near communities and not exported abroad, and that value must circulate through community-based businesses and cooperatives, and on cost as well as value, but who is defining the costs? We've been speaking about data collection and sovereignty. What data is decision-making based on? And so there needs to be a high level of community-led monitoring and reporting, as granular as water testing to soil sampling, so that the real health costs become visible. And then lastly, investing in regenerative infrastructure as part of these extraction contracts, which are non-negotiables rather than charitable. And so this is kind of at a raw materials end of the big tech supply chain. But then we can look sort of further up the infrastructure supply chain. And as part of my work, I've as Professor Nelson articulated, I've worked at Google DeepMind, but I've also gone to the I guess bottom of the supply chain, visiting not only AI infrastructure sites but sites of extraction. So this is the Atacama Desert in Chile, where we see the lithium salt flats that power the battery industry, and then in Santiago de Chile, there's also massive Google data centers that are being built, same in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and then also the semiconductor industry in Taiwan, where we've been visiting the water treatment facilities in the chip manufacturing process. Similarly, during my time in Cape Town last week, where I was with a group including Dr. Kabemba, we visited the Orange Marine submarine cable repair ship Leon Tivinin in the Cape Town harbour. And what you see here are the underwater sea cables that are kind of looped, which are essentially how our global internet infrastructure is connected. And you see here in my hand, that is literally the underwater sea cable that crosses all around our continents. And it's really striking how small and vulnerable they are, and sometimes they're broken because an anchor is dropped onto it. And so I think we were there with policymakers, and it shapes our understanding of what the physical infrastructure and the materiality of our big tech supply chain. We also visited the Center for High Performance Computing, which supports advanced computational research and democratizes access to high-powered computing across the SADC region. But what I want to bring our attention to is similarly to the protests at COP, is that at these sites of infrastructure expansion that is needed for this AI boom, we also see the impacts on communities. So, for example, in Malaysia, the semiconductor industry has been in operation since the 70s and 80s, with a central hub in Penang. And that this industrial area has also been expanded to accommodate for this industry, and it impacts communities because it's based on a coastal reclamation project, so expansion of land. And this has impacted the local fragile ecosystem, and also fishermen, the traditional industry that has been operating for an extended amount of time. And so there have been protests by the community because of the destruction of livelihoods under the campaign of Penang Tolak Tambak. And there's also this striking relationship between the semiconductor industry in Malaysia and then the semiconductor industry in Taiwan, where, upon visiting this water treatment facility, because the chips manufacturing requires very pure, high quality water, there's actually pollution in the local rivers in the Hsinchu area. And so you see campaigners who are saying that industry requires good water, but the people drink the wastewater from this industry. So these are examples of how, across the supply chain, whether it be at an extraction site level or at a semiconductor or infrastructural level, that there are impacts to community that need to be, that guardrails need to be developed around for, especially workers and communities who are at these exact sites. So to maintain the integrity of people and ecosystems as we experience this boom. So the last part of what I will speak to is, I'll return it to this slide, but today we've been talking a lot about negotiations at a regional bloc, and this is because of the inherent interconnected nature of our global economy, and you see that at the impacts of local communities, and then at a transnational level. So there's this need for African countries to negotiate better terms collectively as a bloc to promote regional cooperation and integration. There's a need for regional bodies to facilitate cooperation on issues such as infrastructure, energy, standards, extraction, and to revisit the rules of trade and international taxation written during a colonial era that results in the maintenance of different African countries at this baseline of extraction. And of course, there are immense barriers to cohesion, but there is a need for joint industrial policy and to create economies of scale so that there is a bargaining power. So when we look more granularly at negotiations, there was kind of some interesting ideas during our gathering in Cape Town, but specifically around pre-understanding and pre-setting the terms of negotiation. Again, when we consider value, the real question is not just who receives value, but who defines the value in the first place. So today we've been talking about data sovereignty and who is collecting the data upon which decisions are made. Is there an analysis across this continent of like where the mineral resources, what is the processing capability, the financial capacity, the tech skills, the expertise and resources, and of course energy, how are they leveraged? And at the same time, how do we understand the costs? Is there a way to develop granular data sets on the environmental and human costs of the needs, of the material and energy needs of this transition? So to close, again, it's this question of value and costs and who is defining it. And then, I also pick up on what was discussed in the opening today, which is how to create alternatives based on other logics rather than the narratives that currently exist are based on devaluation, dehumanization, and extraction. And then also when you tell this new story, when you reevaluate what the narrative is, when you reevaluate what the value of land, labor, people, resources, you really interfere with the existing logic and power setting of this current economic system. So I think at the core of it, there's this need for regional cooperation at a transnational level, but also at this grassroots level. So I'll close here, but I'll pass it on now to our next.
Thank you, Marie-Therese, for that almost real-time reporting and witness and reflections from COP30, as well as your reflections from the time you've spent both most recently and for many, many years on the ground in Malaysia, Taiwan, the DRC, and elsewhere. I just want to highlight that you've highlighted for us the community impact, community intervention, but also this kind of community imperative, and for any conversation that we might wish to have around AI and geopolitics, in addition to the important way that you ended us with thinking about value and mapping the costs broadly considered. We'll now turn to our last presentation on the panel, our colleague Christian Gironima, with great thanks.
Hello, Alondra. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's always a challenge when you're presenting the last, and you always have less minutes than the others. That's why I won't have any presentation to show you. I'm just going to have a few remarks, and I hope that the folks in the room, I'll be able to steer enough debate, to steer enough, question in your head so we can have a debate on the topic. So I've been asked to look into how Africa is recentering its place in all this debate about critical minerals access, geopolitics, and value chain of AI. There was a graphic that I was looking at. I don't know if you have the time to look. If you had the time to look at it, that was released by the U.S. government last month about the AI supply chain, the minerals in the critical mineral supply chain. It was really interesting. And as a researcher, I really spent a lot of time to look into where African countries are fitting into that debate, because when we talk about the geopolitics of critical minerals, first of all, we tend to make it an African debate as a general, because we want to talk about natural resources. every country and everyone is basically making every natural resource as critical minerals. I remember a few months back, I was in Zambia, I was telling people at this point, I don't believe that first of all, it's not an African debate. It's a debate for few African countries, because when you look into, we talk about geopolitics and we talk about the shares of each country, what they produce in terms of those minerals, we have to talk about those are global producer and at least continental producer. If you are not a continental producer, if you are not a global producer, you just don't have a space to be part of a geopolitical debate in that space, for one simple reason. Because when you talk about value addition, all of that processing, we talk about economy of scale. And the question will be, are you going to put a few of the resources that you do have to put it in a debate where you want to talk about value addition and resource processing in an economy of a resource that doesn't really play a major role into economy? You won't be doing that. You're going to be thinking of like, how am I going to reduce my resources in a way that's really useful for me, for my economy, in terms of economic growth, development, industrialization, and all of that. And talking about the values and the revenues, and we want to get of it. It just leads me to a second point I want to mention in terms of like the element of leverage that we do have as African countries. So far, we've seen that across the continent, that export ban, export quotas, and countries mimicking what Indonesia has done since 2017 and seeing other countries. Exported and export quota has become the tools that producing countries are using across the global south to say, this is our way to stay into the debate. This is our way to remain part of the debate. And to that export ban and those export quota now attach a set of demand of like, we want local value chain, local processing, local transformation. We want all of that being able to do that. Some countries have even gone far to say we want to be able to produce EV batteries locally, which basically, when you look at the industrial infrastructure of those countries, those demands are just not rational. They just don't make sense. But somehow, because of the geopolitical debate that we attach to access to natural resources, they say we want to be able to do that, without even now questioning, do we really need to do that? What I mean by that when I say, do we really need to do that, is the question like, what do we want to get out of those minerals? Do we want to get what do we want local value chain, basically? Do we want to increase the revenue that we get from a more advanced processed minerals during export? Or do we want to get the end product of those minerals at a different price or a different advantage of it? Because when you think of it in terms of leverage, export ban, export quota will have a limited effect over time. Why? Because the debate about local value chain of AI, of critical minerals, it's a technological debate. Why it's a technological debate? It's a technological debate in a sense where the country that controls the application of those minerals will determine whether or not those minerals are valuable or not. I'm going to give you a simple example. 6 years from now, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, cobalt was really something very valuable in EV industry. But now we are talking about sodium-ion battery without even cobalt. In the meantime, we had the value chain, we had the story of lithium. You know, lithium is the one that's replacing cobalt. And then we had the same country, China, who's basically controlling both cobalt and lithium, say, you know what, I want to change, I want to advance to a different space where I will develop the kind of battery where I don't need cobalt, I don't need lithium, I don't need nickel. I want to develop a kind of technology that allows me to be able to develop all those technology without depending on other countries. So when you think like that, you realize that once a country like China or other countries develop new technology, you being producer of cobalt, copper, and all of that basically becomes a moot point, because you realize that, yes, you have minerals that at the end are not useful as people want it to be. So the question becomes, when you think of that, where do you place yourself? Where is your true leverage? Is it your leverage only on a production side of the debate, or your leverage should be thinking of like, what's going to be the technology of tomorrow, and where do I put myself in the technology of tomorrow in a way that I'm able to be still valuable? So it takes me back to the question I was asking before, of when you think of like, what do you want to get from those energy and those critical minerals we talked today, you think of like, is it revenues or is it access? Or And answering that question allows you to think of different kind of tools. You say, instead of me fighting for local processing, shouldn't be fighting about having access to the end product in terms of like a discount price. When we talk about EVs, when we talk about that, because my minerals today are helping to produce that, instead of like me fighting to have local processing, because let's face it, local processing and value chain, it's highly intensively polluting and all of that. Instead of me bearing the cost of pollution and all of that, can I just negotiate at the end having the end product at a discount prices to say, you know what, we weren't going to fight with you in the middle, in the mid segment, because on the mid segment, we may not have the leverage for that. But because we are on the downstream, because they're on the upstream, we can also negotiate the downstream to say, can we have a better access, a different discount price to those end product and to those end technology. I'm pointing those elements out there just for us to start of rethinking the tools that we think we have as a leverage to recenter ourselves into the debate. Yes, regional cooperation it can be a solution in a sense where we want to build economy of scale on how we make that happen. But when you think of regional cooperation, you also have to understand the tension that it brings in terms of like competition over cooperation. When you are in Zimbabwe, you can think like, why am I going to send my lithium to Mozambique? Why not Mozambique is going to send me his graphite? When you're in Zimbabwe, why am I going to send my lithium to Zambia? Why is Zambia not going to do the other way around? When I'm South Africa, why am I going to send my platinum to Zimbabwe when I have access to the ocean, and Zimbabwe should be sending all its lithium down here because I have the access to water and all of that. And all of that creates an element of competition and cooperation that countries are going to have to resolve. On paper, it can be done, but when you think of now the political economy of each country in terms of like how they see those natural resources, why they're making those demands about export ban and export quota, you're gonna realize it becomes much more complex and much more difficult to get to a point where regional bodies working together find a common leverage that satisfy both the political economy of each producing countries and the regional demand of the region as a grouping of countries. I'm going to stop there. I don't want to go on many things. I'm going to stop there, but I try to just put few elements out there to think of like what could be the leverage that we do have as producing countries in Africa, and start to rethink of different ways to get what we want out of those competition. Is it really value chain? Local value chain is really the way to go? Or to forward thinking, or like what technology is going to be tomorrow for us to be in that space in a way that 10 years from now, we are still relevant in the debate. Otherwise, we're going to be missing the train of technology and how things are moving so fast that we don't even control them.
Thank you so much, Christian Giroux, for really laying out the really kind of dynamic landscape that all of this is taking place in, and the strategic competition conversations that need to happen, even as it's probably likely that some of the regional collaboration that Marie-Therese suggested could be helpful as well. But I love the wonderful intervention and provocations. If I could turn things over, I think, to Patrick Kulati in the room for the conversation with appreciation.
Thank you so much, Prof. Nelson, and to your team there. I think you've covered quite a lot of ground and shared very insightful comments from all the presenters. We have a few more minutes, maybe 2 minutes, to check if there's any question here on the floor. Okay, I'm going to give two to people that I haven't given questions to yet. All right? Okay, so there's one question there at the back. Is there any other question? Sorry? I can't see. Okay, I'll give it to you. Those are the two. And then please be specific in terms of what your question, if possible, the person you're speaking to. And then the panel, please be specific in your question, in your answering as well. We're running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Gilbert Kadiagala at Wits University. My question is to Christian. Can you just elaborate your argument on leverage? You are saying the Chinese are not using cobalt, they are not using lithium in their batteries. And therefore you developed another argument that says maybe their leverage is not in cobalt, it's not in lithium. Where is it exactly? So I just want some clarity on your argument.
Thank you, sir. Let's
Yes.
go. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Bokele Twara, also from Wits. Just a quick question. I think the conversation was, today was more on how Africa has just been a center for other, organizations, your West, whatever, being extractors from us, right? So my question in relation to AI, maybe along the lines of, large language models, we are talking about the conversation of this is to marry, the conversation of, data collection. I know there is actually funding that was maybe given to UCT recently about the AI initiative in relation to ethical consideration on, the people that are affected by the then data that is collected, right? And I think one of the other related questions to this is how, given the languages within Africa are morphologically complex, it's something that's very, difficult for people to capture. So from that angle of ethical consideration, what is currently, because I know you did mention something about the negotiations that are currently going on about, what's to be done in terms of the data collections and how things are built. So just from that, what are the advancements in the ethical consideration, particularly moving away from the West and other countries being people who are just here to take data and build whatever outside? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll give Dr. Kojo just to make it quick, Doc, and then we only have 4 minutes to wrap it all up. I made a mistake. I said this was the last session. There's just one more. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think the last speaker, I'm not sure I could, yeah. But so I think for today we've been talking about how to disrupt or generate alternative processes for trade and other kinds of wealth creation. So when I look at the AI stack, I'm asking myself, does it make sense for us to fit ourselves into one of those squares, or we should be re-looking or taking a different look at the stack and or reimagining the stack? So, because it might be that we get caught again in the same, I think your point about being exporters, and that might think that will be our low-hanging fruit, but then it makes us stay in the structure that we are trying to disrupt. So is there another way of thinking about the stack where Africa really can be at the driving seat? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll deal with those questions. I'll ask my panelists. We'll start with you. Is it Gerald?
Jero, yes.
Yes, sir.
I think the two questions, I don't know if it's really directed to me. The second one, definitely not to me. But I'm gonna cover the first one. Yes, talking about cobalt and lithium and all of that, I was talking about where do we point our leverage today. So far, all the tools that we've used in the continent, we are putting our leverage that we are using, the tools that we are using are basically on the fact that we are producing those minerals. So we are focusing on our leverage on the upstream of the supply chain, because I'm producing, I can control the market, and then I can determine whether I get out of the market. So, but when you look at the downstream, the mid and downstream of the supply chain, you realize that big countries are the one determining what values your upstream do have today. If today the technology advanced to the point that, as I mentioned, when NMC batteries were still the main batteries in many EVs like 6, 7, 10 years ago, that cobalt was still important. But once a country like China, the main producer, the main user, say, you know what, I want to change the technology. China has now moved from NMC batteries to LFP batteries, using more lithium batteries. What it had as an impact, not only because it was controlling the upstream in terms of production, but it has also an impact in terms of the demand on the market, in terms of the price and the value of those cobalt. And then the same China is still moving to regarding the old landscape of critical minerals and the geopolitics of it, and say, you know what, let's develop a new technology moving from cobalt, from lithium, to something that's gonna not require us to depend on another country, developing new technology, and now sodium-ion batteries and all kinds of those batteries. Because of they control the upstream, it means they control the downstream. They control the end use, the end final application of those minerals. Immediately they determine whether or not you having cobalt, you having lithium, or you having nickel is important to the market or not. Because at the end, when we look at the AI supply chain, all those supply chain of these different critical minerals, it's only when your minerals is useful for the end use that your minerals is valuable. But once that changes, once the technology at the end changes, your values today also will change. So the question will be, yes, you're producing today, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when there will be a technology where people don't need cobalt, they don't need lithium, are you still going to be valuable? So the question is, given when you see what's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15 years, you wonder today, what can I be using today as real leverage, allowing me to get the advantage I want to get? Because let's face it, do we want to get processing? Let me just pose a question. Between you having processing plant of lithium and cobalt in your country and all of that, and having the final product of those minerals, but at a very discount price than any other countries, which one would you have? Which one would you want to have? One of them will allow you to remove just the cost of environmental cost and impact of processing your country, allowing you to have the end product. So it's just about thinking what could be a different kind of leverage that you can use to allow us to get a better solution out of this competition.
Thank you, sir. Who else was the question directed to?
I think maybe we'll go to Marie-Therese for the second question, and maybe Tatiana for the third, and I'll pass.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just quickly, I think I can break down the question into two areas, which is on data collection and sovereignty, and then kind of ethical considerations around large language models. So, when I was talking about data collection, it was really around, do we have community level monitoring and reporting of the costs? And on that account, there are tools such as South African Research Watch's African Mining and Artisanal Monitoring Platform. But then it's like, the question of where is that data being stored, who owns that data, but then also if the local laws around data ownership supersedes foreign orders, for example. So these are all questions to be asking around, what does it mean to collect granular data around the costs, from the need for it to what sort of governing paradigms are surrounding it. And then around the AI ethical considerations, I know that I think it's at UCT, there's the African AI Safety Lab, and it's really interesting how they break down questions of risk and safety. It's looking at developing low resource language models, and also different strategies of testing models by using jailbreaking strategies, using different African languages, and understanding that these languages are morphologically complex, etc. But it fits into this wider question of, which again goes down to costs. How are we defining the ethical issues within AI on the continent? And so the way that this group break it down is looking at malicious uses of these models, but then also thinking about malfunction and reliability issues, questioning the fact that these models are often trained on Western data, that there's bias, etc. And also thinking at more systemic level issues of labor and environmental pressures that we've been discussing today. So this fits into this wider discussion. But yeah, the question of large language models, fits into this wider discussion, not just of who are these language models being developed for, what data is it being trained on, and then also what sort of data sovereignty protocols are underpinning it.
All right, Dr. Tatiana, you're the last person to respond. Thank you.
Thanks, and maybe I'll share this with Alondra. But yes, I think what we've tried to do is to reimagine the stack by expanding it to include the downstream and Africa's role in the downstream, and also in the upstream. Each layer in the stack has its own, offers us opportunities for both local governance, regional governance, and various points of intervention. And I think we can, we can recenter the continent, frankly, in each of these layers, and that's, MT was talking about the need for regional cooperation. And right now it's very difficult to see, especially given the state of the subregion where most of the natural resource producers are. But there are efforts at digital cooperation that are outside the mineral producing regions. So where can we actually identify regional cooperation across the various layers in the stack, even if it's unlikely that we're going to see regional cooperation around setting the terms and the prices and so on around natural resources. So I think this is a fruitful area of research as we begin to unpack the AI stack. And so let me just leave it there, and maybe Alondra, you have some thoughts.
Yeah, just a final thought. I mean, we titled this panel Inverting the AI Stack. We certainly could have called it Reimagining the AI Stack. So I really take your question, because that's very much what we're trying to put forward here, which is to say, particularly with all of the hype and the political power and the economic power behind AI, what comes with it is a very forceful narrative about what constitutes it, about who matters in the work that AI does and what doesn't matter. And both we were trying to pay attention and sort of inverting or reimagining the stack in both what seems clear in things like Jensen Wang's slide from his recent presentation, and what is hidden and what's unarticulated. And so that reimagining is all the things that we want to articulate and bring to the table. We've only put a few out for conversation this afternoon, but I think there are many more, and I would invite all of us to continually be reimagining AI, reimagining the stack and the narratives around it, rather than accepting what we're told and the silences that comes with that. So with that, I want to just thank you very much for all of your attention, for having us here, and for the very rich discussion, and look forward to more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chef. Give them a round of applause. Thank you, Professor Nelson. Indeed, great. We learn every day. We learn every day. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. The nice thing about today's world is that you can go to someone's LinkedIn and then establish a relationship, have chats, have your questions answered, and so forth, if we cannot do everything here. So take the screenshot, check their name out, go to LinkedIn. Thank you so much.